So hi everyone and welcome back to our channel. So we are the Mindset Junkies and I'm Stephen.
And I'm Allie. And if you're new to our channel, thank you so much for stopping by. We hope that you like what we have to say, and we definitely like to talk. So we have a whole playlist of other videos, so please check them out. And if you are a returning subscriber, then it's great to have you back with us again. So let's jump straight into tonight's discussion. Recently, we did an episode on dealing with success. So we felt that we had to jump onto the flip side and only appropriate to look at coping with failure. We all interpret failure in lots of different ways. Some people think that anything and everything in their lives that doesn't go their way is a signal that they or their life is a big fat failure, which is absolutely not the case. Perhaps you might think that failure means that you're a bad person or that you'll never succeed. Or maybe you think that no one will like you if you fail. And sometimes failure becomes debilitating. And when it gets to that point, really you do need to seek out some professional help. But we all experience different degrees of failure in our lives. And Stephen and I are no strangers to failure. You know, we know that sting of emotion when it happens, and it can be so hard. And whilst we want to remove the pain that we all feel when we fail, we can help to provide you with an opportunity to look at the other side of failure and find some of the undeniable benefits from the experience. So whether, the failure is down to you being denied a promotion at work, or you didn't qualify for that marathon, failing feels bad. There's no doubt about that. And many people will go to great lengths to avoid failing so that they don't actually have to deal with the painful emotions. And in doing so, you limit yourself to the experience and moments in your life that actually will define you. I know that every failure I've had has taught me the lessons I needed to learn, and I've gone on to never make those mistakes again. So there are many reasons why you might be feeling like a failure, and some factors that might play a role include that feeling of hopelessness and that nothing ever goes right for you. You could be feeling anxiety or depression, or just that feeling of helplessness. You may have a lack of support in your life, or you may have low self-esteem. And making comparisons to others will always make you feel like you're failing in some way, which leads to poor self-concept and negative self-talk. And then you set unrealistic expectations on yourself that, again, just sometimes will set you up for failure. So if you find yourself thinking, I'm a failure, it's important to know that there are things you can do to feel better. Knowing how you deal with failure in a healthy way takes some of the fear out of it, and it might reduce the pain so that you can bounce back better than before.
Yeah, and what's interesting about those words you use there, Ali, so the saying to yourself, I am a failure, it's interesting that you're not actually a failure. What you've done is you've experienced a failure. You felt a failure. It's not that you are a failure. It's like, if we think about it, a lot of what we've covered in past episodes is being about kind of creating that mental shift in ourselves, hasn't it? That, we are not our feelings. We are not our thoughts. We are not our emotions. We're something different. And, if we label ourselves with kind of a lot of those names, then it's like,
reinforce that negative feeling about ourselves. And
definitely.
And we've said in the past is about really check the language that you're using with yourself, and just take that moment to sort of say, how can I express how I feel in a different way that feels like it's got more promise or more positivity to it?
And definitely agree. I think that shift in how we talk to ourselves is so important in this and a lot of other areas as well. Like, it even translates into other things as well, doesn't it? Of like, I am hungry. That's saying, I'm hungry. He's like, you just, then you're bound to feel as though you want to go and eat. But it's like, if you begin to shift that, I feel hungry right now. You're beginning to associate yourself with the emotion instead of you thinking that you are the thing.
That's right. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. But let's get some context here about failure. And before you go and beat yourself up too much, think about some that have taken place in our history, long-term history or even short-term history. The Titanic, the Challenger space shuttle, Chernobyl, Deepwater Horizon, all of which cost lives or huge impact to not only our environment, but our nature for years to come. And therefore, the failures that we feel that we are all experiencing do sort of like pale into small potatoes when we compare them to the burden some people have had to carry as a result of some of the failures, the catastrophic failures that I've just mentioned there. But I can guarantee that in every single one of those failures, they resulted in a learning and a growing from them.
That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah,
definitely the key.
Yeah. Learning effective ways to cope with failure can help you increase your willingness to take risks and push beyond the boundaries of your comfort zone. We haven't stopped creating nuclear fuel or getting to space or pumping oil out of the oceans because of the disasters that I've just mentioned. If anything, our endeavours in these areas have only grown and increased.
Mm-hmm.
But first of all, sorry, were you going to say something, Stephen?
Yeah, I was just saying that I definitely agree. It's like, things like the disasters that happen, what they do is begin to kind of educate and inform. So you're exactly right, aren't you, about the learning opportunities that come from them? Because, if we think about things like the nuclear disaster, Chernobyl, what the outcome of that was in the end was it kind of that led to much more stringent regulation guidelines around the way that nuclear power plants operate. It's similar things around around the Titanic. It was things around kind of safety on boats. It was making sure there was the appropriate kind of life rafts available, all that kind of thing. If we think of space shuttle disasters, that I can't remember, it was one of the big ones that was a number of years ago. There was then more stringent safety requirements actually put in place on the back of them. So it wasn't like these failures just happened and it was like, yeah, that's fine. That was just a failure. It was like they was learned from and developed. And this is something we definitely need to do ourselves more.
Yeah, absolutely. But first of all, what is failure? Well, the dictionary says that failure is the condition of not meeting a goal or intended outcome. And that seems sort of like quite black and white, but I guess it depends on what was that goal realistic, or was the intended outcome realistic in the first place? I could say that I'm about to start a business and I want to be a millionaire within 6 months. Is that actually a realistic goal for me? And if I didn't meet it, does that put me down as being a failure? So it's about how do you actually sort of like categorize what those goals or intended outcomes were. And if they're unrealistic, then, it's not necessarily a failure. It actually means that the goal or the intended outcome was unrealistic.
Yeah, I agree.
Failures in the workplace present the greatest opportunities for employee growth. And I find that working for a leader that encourages failure and out of the box thinking, because of the innovation and learning that comes from it, is actually one of the best experiences that you can actually ever have.
Agree. There's been a lot of research on this as well. The concept called psychological safety and organizations that follow these principles around psychological safety, they are some of the most innovative in the world. It's unfortunate that one of those that I work for is one of those companies. And we actually have people in to go and basically teach us about the very nature of taking risk, and as a leader of people who would take risks, basically making sure that you're encouraging them to continue to do so, and that as a leader, you have their back. That, you know, if they do try, then they do fail. If they firmly believe that the thing that they was trying to do was the right thing, that, you know, as a leader, you have their back. You definitely have their back. And, you know, the result of that is it's basically the birth of some of the most innovative organizations in the world, because they experiment. They're so prone to taking risks, progressing, developing, and so on.
Yeah. So anyway, just to let you know, my internet dropped twice there. So our recording is probably going to be blipped.
Yeah, well, it was okay, because I just picked up the mantle and ran with it.
Right.
Let me just flick my video on, and I don't know if this will help me see it, but yeah, no, okay. Right, yeah, so continue.
Right, okay, right, that's fine. So shall I just pick up from there?
Yeah, so if the, in fact, there are...
Yeah, so failures in relationships, whilst emotionally hard, especially when that relationship fails, teaches us to look at behaviours and language in ourselves, but also in others too. And it teaches us to learn how to read some of the patterns and signs when the same thing is happening again when you go into other relationships. In fact, there are undeniable benefits from failures. And while no one enjoys failing, there are actually several very powerful benefits associated with failing, which makes it all the more important to learn to cope with failure. Failures make you smarter. Research shows that your brain actually gets bigger when it's compiling information about an experience. When you fail, your brain retains the new pathways by taking new information and compiling the takeaways from the trial and error. I mean, who hasn't had a horrible experience after eating or drinking something and you swear never to eat or drink it again? And I've got this experience of going to a friend's hen do and drinking Southern Comfort. And I was horrifically ill the next day. And I remember it really, really clearly, not just because I was really ill, but it actually was the day that Princess Diana died as well. So it has a sort of memory for me. But I've never ever drunk Southern Comfort again. It's not even something that crosses my mind. I just will not touch it because this memory that I've got of this horrible experience and being horrifically ill will never ever leave me. So if I was to sort of say that that was a failure of mine, then it's a failure that I've never ever revisited, and it's made me, you know, smarter in terms of never going back there again.
I think many others have probably had a similar experience with some form of alcohol.
Absolutely.
Horrendous things.
Absolutely. But failure does mean that you're taking risks, and risks is actually a good thing to do. You know, we've talked recently about risks versus calculated risks just a few weeks ago. And if you're successful in everything you do, you probably aren't pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone. So by leaning into risk and accepting the possibility of failure, you may find that you identify more creative solutions or greater successes. And many times have we been hurt in a relationship and we've gone into the next relationship absolutely sure that we'll not make those mistakes again. Failing provides opportunities for rapid growth, and rapid growth is possible when you learn from the insight of others. Test what you think might work and learn from what doesn't. And we see this in time memorial in history about, you know, the iterative growing and learning from mistakes that has made the innovation in engineering and in industry to where we are at today. We wouldn't be where we're at today if others in the past hadn't taken those risks, made some mistakes, failed in terms of what their sort of outcomes, expected outcomes were, learned from them and implemented the learning to actually innovate and take us to, you know, better engineering, better concepts of, you know, how we go about our daily lives. Yeah. Do you have an example of something that you want to share with us on failure?
Yeah, so I was reflecting on this when we said it was going to be this episode that we cover off, and initially it was like, well, I can't really think of anything, but then things started to come up, right? And I've got two that I want to talk about. One that's relevant because it's like within the last week, and then another that's again probably relevant for many people because they would have experienced this and maybe continue to as well. So the one from last week. So I know that the stock market's not been doing very well lately, as I'm sure some of you people who invest in it are aware. And that's okay, right? Ups and downs, perfectly fine. Now, what I'm specifically referring to here is the crypto markets with this example. And I put a small amount of money, and at least it was small to me, in a specific cryptocurrency account. And over the last like year and a half, I basically put it in different currencies, and it had steadily been growing. And then at some point, it was about 6 months ago, it bombed. And that's okay, speculate, accumulate, that kind of thing. And then I came across a piece of research about a crypto called Terra Luna. And first off, the name intrigued me because I was like, my daughter's called Luna, and that's pretty cool. But the thing is, that's not very good advice. I'm not giving advice for investment for a start, right? But buying a stock, a share, crypto, whatever, purely because you like the name is just not something you do. But it wasn't only that about it, right? So this was, I did a fair bit of research around it, and it looked like one of the more stable, solid cryptos that was out there. Like for a start, it tracked against the US dollar. So that was kind of an element of protection for it potentially failing. It was volatile as most of these are. So, some days, some weeks it was crazy up. Like I think at times it was like 100, 200% up. And then other times it was actually down quite massively. And, that was okay. It was like, I was in this for the long game. But then I was away on a weekend break with the family just this weekend gone, and I just noticed there was an article that had been shared by Hargreave Lansdown, and it was talking about the downfall of Terra Luna. And I was like, oh, what's this? This can't be good. So I opened it up, and they was basically talking about how this currency had gone down to be worth like $0.00001. Like, oh, okay. Opened up my crypto account, and lo and behold, all my units of this Terra Luna had been gone, and there was no money left in the account. It had all disappeared. And there was a message there from the account provider basically saying that supposedly to protect people's I don't know, integrity, assets, whatever they want to do, they basically sold off all of the investments. And I was like, well, that's a bit counterintuitive, but anyway. So I sat there and reflected on it, and I was like, you know what, whatever, it's fine. If I wanted to play it safe, I wouldn't have put it where it was. I wouldn't have put it in crypto for a start. This was purely speculative. This was a pure, let's hope that this is going to go somewhere like a Bitcoin has. And there was a lot of fundamentals that sat underneath it, not just the part about it tracking against the US dollar. There was a lot of other things that actually showed that it was actually supposedly a strong, stable coin. Turned out, wasn't. And now it's gone, all gone. So, that's a failure. And in terms of lessons, I don't think I'd do anything different, because this is just something that happened, right? And it could happen at any point with any of the cryptos. And it's a part of this thing that it's a speculate to accumulate thing in this instance, that, as I mentioned before, if I didn't want to fail, I wouldn't put it in there. No chance. If you do not want to fail and you are an investor, then don't risk your money in crypto. Simple as. That's my view anyway. That's one of the most highly speculative things. The other one that I think many people will resonate with is, so before I joined Salesforce in 2016, I was working for Hewlett Packard, and I was they classed me in the future leader category, where they was basically fast tracking me through the organization. But the organization was going through a lot of change. So we went from being HP to Hewlett Packard, and there was multiple organizations that were created, and different elements of the business was spun off, sold off, merged with others, de-invested, all this kind of thing. And I remember there was a period of time of over 2 years where I was promised, you're going to be getting a promotion. And then when it came to getting that promotion, I was told, right, you've ticked all the boxes, but we're going through this merger, divestiture, whatever it is. So you're not going to get it this time because nobody is. But wait 6 months and then it'll go through. So then you wait 6 months, same position. You're like, oh, no, promotion's frozen. So that happened 2 or 3 times. And that to me is a failure, because it was like it's holding your career back. It's stopping you from progressing. And it was treated as the same kind of thing in my mind, as though, you're being knocked back at kind of a job interview type of thing, because you're working your damned hardest. You're being promised these things, but then they're not actually coming and happening. Now, what the lesson from this was I left. It got to about 2 years later, and I had pretty much an offer lined up from Salesforce, and I took voluntary redundancy from whatever the company was called then, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, I think it was. But the key lesson is that, I should have seen that coming. I should have seen it coming, and I should have jumped sooner. And I had an opportunity to jump sooner, but I didn't. I stuck to it, stuck to the safety. And that I would advocate not necessarily to do. To just as Ali was saying before, failing provides opportunities for rapid growth, right? So if you are to risk the failure of potentially joining another organization, then the potential reward is that you're going to have rapid growth. Just as I wasn't experiencing whilst I was at HP. So I was experiencing stalled growth.
Yeah. Been in exactly the same situation, Stephen, where, lots of promotion has been offered, promised, and then it never transpired. And, naturally, you just want to put faith there back, but it just all seems to be words, and you stick with it until you realize that in actual fact, it is empty promises. And you do look at it as a failure, because you do blame yourself for, trusting and having these, natural values that you stick with, because you want to see in others the values that you hold for yourself. And then when it all doesn't happen, you blame yourself for, kind of like having those values, or trusting people, or, being gullible, or, not reading between the lines. And eventually you then have to make the decision to learn from that, and never ever want to put your career, I suppose, in the hands of somebody else. And it's, like I think we've mentioned this before, what is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. And I don't think a life should be lived in regret, right? So looking back on that time, right, there was a lot of things that I still learned. So yeah, whilst I do reflect back and maybe did ponder like, I should have done it sooner. What actually came out of it was that there was a lot of valuable experience that I got that actually helped me in the next role that I then gained at Salesforce. In fact, I think if I had have potentially gone at the early stage, I wouldn't have actually met the person that I ended up working with at Salesforce, and who essentially brought me in. So he was the one who said, I want you at Salesforce. I want to bring you in. I want you to join my team, work with me, this other person who was also working for HP at the time. And that was the start of the journey. So, I guess it's sometimes just stick around, sometimes do, sometimes don't. Just weigh up the positives and the negatives with it.
Yeah, but I think the message is that not to take it personally, not to think that you're the failure.
Yeah.
It could really be down to somebody else, but there is a situation where you don't sort of like take it all on yourself, and you might want to analyze what you might have done differently had you in hindsight. But at the end of the day, it's actually taking from something from that experience, learning from it, and making sure that next time around you would do something slightly differently. And we've both learned from those similar experiences to take us to where we are today.
Agree. So I hope that you get in here that Allie and I both have strong views on how failure should be viewed. And that, as Allie just mentioned there, it's not something that you should take personally. Definitely something that you should take as a learning opportunity, and you can use it to move forward and to actually progress, get some growth, momentum. That rapid growth side of things, I think, is such an important piece. And just treating that, even though it may be seen as a bad experience, if we reflect on the Southern Comfort experience that Ali mentioned, it's a bad experience that's probably held, because, to be honest, Southern Comfort's not that good, is it? Really, it's not that nice. So,
no, it's not.
Yeah,
no,
they're definitely not. No. Yeah, and I'm sure that we've all been there with those kind of things too, like whether it's food that we eat or whatever, and it's just thinking of the good in these things. So similar to what was mentioned in the previous episode when we talked about the negative feelings, thinking about this with failure, it's also important to ensure that we do actually lean in and embrace some of the emotions and feelings that are actually associated with this experience. So we're just going to cover a couple of points related to these. And the first one is about exactly that. It's about how you should embrace your emotions. So a 2017 study published in the Journal of Behavioral Decision Making says that you shouldn't try to avoid feeling bad after a failure. So the researchers discovered that thinking about your emotions rather than the failure itself is most helpful. Just allowing yourself to feel bad, it can actually be motivating. It can help you to work harder to find better solutions so that you actually improve next time. And in kind of thinking about this, so some of the work that Ali and I have been exposed to through Tony Robbins, he does exactly this with his Dickens pattern. He has you think about what it would be like forward looking if you have a goal, what it would feel like to have not achieved your goal. And then it amplifies, and then it amplifies again, and it amplifies again. So it grows more and more intense, because what you're imagining is yourself failing in 5 years' time. So if you've got a goal, you've failed. 5 years' time ahead, you've failed. 5 years' time ahead again, so 10 years into the future, what's that failed goal look like to you now? What about 15 years into the future? What does that failed goal look like? And what he's actually doing in this process is creating that emotional connection to that amplified failure. So, that goal in 5 years' time of, just a simple one that Ali and I often refer to is, say, it might be to lose 10 kilo or something like that, or 20 kilo, whatever. What would that be like in 5 years' time for you? And what's the feelings and emotions attached to that? The same for 10 years' time, 20 years' time. And the way that Tony puts this is you really, this amplification is really bringing some things that you maybe haven't thought of to life. Because if you think about the excess weight that you may have wanted to lose, but you haven't, then in 20, 30 years' time, that could actually be massive detriment to your health. So it's that we're talking to in terms of the emotions here. So basically what we're saying is that it just, when you experience a failure, just go ahead and try to embrace your emotions. Just acknowledge how you're feeling and let yourself feel bad for a bit. The important part of this is to label the emotions as you allow yourself to experience them. So, for example, you might think, I feel disappointed, or I'm feeling sad that didn't work out. And just remember that a setback or failure isn't a reflection of who you are as an individual. And by understanding that failure, it's just a part of the process. It's a part of your learning experience. It's a part of your development. It's not a part of your identity. You can maintain the confidence to continue pursuing your goal, which then actually leads us on to the next coping strategy. So this one is about recognizing unhealthy attempts to reduce pain. So you might be tempted to say to yourself, well, you know what, that job, I didn't want it anyway. So in my instance, I didn't want that promotion anyway, it's fine. Or I always knew he or she would cheat on me, for instance. But minimizing your pain won't make it go away. Distracting yourself or filling the void you feel with, for example, dismissive language, it could be food, it could be drugs, alcohol, it won't heal the pain either. Those things will only provide you with some temporary relief. Recognize the unhealthy ways that you try to adopt or minimize pain in your life. Look to turn to coping mechanisms that maybe do kind of good for you. So rather than those that necessarily won't. So things like journaling, things like meditation, things that allow you to sit with it and reflect with it. So this is why kind of practicing these healthy things, because we're able to kind of, with meditation, with journaling, it's reflective. So we're able to kind of sit with it. We're able to kind of practice just observing what has been going on and understanding things from maybe a different point of view to what we originally did. Now, the third one, which we kind of alluded to towards the end there, is around the healthy coping skills. Now, there are a number of different ways, which we mentioned a couple just a moment ago, but there are many, many others that we could actually do here as well. So one is that we could call a friend, just talk about some of the things that we are feeling, some of the experiences associated with the failure, just get their perspective. We could be doing some deep breathing techniques to give ourselves some space. It could be having a little bit of pampering, maybe taking a bubble bath, going for a walk, playing with your pet, your children. These are just a few examples of a few healthy ways of how we may deal with some pain. And not every coping skill works for everyone. However, it's important to find what does work for you. Now, if you struggle with bad habits when you are stressed out, so maybe things like smoking or eating junk food, why not try to create a list of healthy coping skills and hang it in a prominent place? Then use your list to remind yourself of the healthiest strategies you can turn to when you are feeling a little bit bad or maybe feeling a little bit down. We've talked previously about the benefits of getting out into nature. So being with people who support you, or just literally just taking a walk by yourself. Sometimes just going for a walk is one of the best things that you can do for yourself. Now, I mentioned the calling a friend. So talking to someone close to you is a great way to manage the many emotions that can accompany a failure. Getting support will help you to accept the failure. It will also potentially help you to gain a different perspective, looking from that third party's perspective. Now, one coaching technique that I often work with clients on is exactly that. Like when they come with a problem, it's looking at it from different angles. So looking at it from their perspective, which is a very valid perspective, looking at it from the other person's perspective, if it's a difficult conversation who they're having the difficult conversation with, very important perspective, because you might not have captured everything that they're potentially feeling or experiencing. And then the third one is about a neutral. So what would a third party think to this? So for instance, if it's a promotion that you've been let down on, you've got your own experiences. What about the hiring manager? What is it that they're going through? Your skills may have not quite fitted what they was looking for, and that's okay. But then what about a third party side of things? Like what about somebody else within the team? What is it that they may be potentially feeling about not getting you in as a person if they was potentially vouching for you, for instance? The key is to find different ways to help to encourage ourselves. So just remember that at some point, everyone has failed at something in their life. The experience that you're having is not unique. Everybody fails to some degree. So maybe do things like also read books about what setbacks others have come across and about how they have managed those low points themselves. Like use their stories to garner enthusiasm or motivation to move beyond that specific failure. The next one is about acknowledging irrational beliefs about failure. So you may have developed some irrational beliefs about failure at some point in your own life. Perhaps you think failure means that you're bad, you're not a good person, that you'll never succeed. Or maybe you think no one will like you if you fail. Those types of beliefs are completely inaccurate. That fear of judgment can cripple a lot of us. So even before we get the chance to fail, we're kind of failing in our own minds because of the stories that we're telling ourselves. They can prevent us from even doing the things before we've even found out if they were going to succeed or not. I make a point to identify the irrational beliefs that might be impacting your feelings and behavior. Instead, develop realistic thoughts about failure, which actually brings to mind another one for me here, another experience. And this is going back many, many, many years. This is like when I was like 18. I sound old by saying many, many years. But it was like when I used to always be on nights out with friends, that if I saw somebody out there who I liked, I would always be fearful of approaching them. And it wasn't because of me getting knocked back. It was because of all my friends. And it was because of the way that they may potentially judge, react, that kind of thing. And it's like when you sit back and think about it, it's laughable, isn't it? That, a lot of our life has potentially been led by what we perceive the reaction of other people to potentially be. It's quite ridiculous, actually. So the next one then is about developing realistic thoughts about failure. So in another study, so this one's, there was a 2016 review published by Clinical Psychology Review. It was basically a review of 46 studies that was done examining reactions to failure. And this found that more positive attributional styles it was a strong factor in how resilient people were to the emotional distress caused by failure. Now, that might sound complicated, but what it basically means is it's about people seeing the failure as a result of something specific and external rather than something internal. So when you find yourself thinking that, you're hopeless, you're lost, you're lost cause, or that there's basically no use in trying again, the key message of this study is to basically reframe your thoughts. To remind yourself of more realistic thoughts about failure, such as, failure is a sign that I'm actually challenging myself to do something a lot more difficult, that I'm pushing myself beyond the comfort zone. That potentially, if I look around me, how many other people are trying to do this? It's a realization, it's a message that, you can handle failure, that you will handle failure with ease and grace, that you can learn and develop from some of the failures that you experience. What you may need to do with this one is to repeat a phrase or affirmation to ward off negative thoughts or to reinforce to yourself that you can bounce back. That you essentially see your failure as constructive criticism. Just look at some of the entrepreneurs out there who they pour their heart and soul into the business. And specifically here, I'm talking about some of the up towards kind of unicorn status. They pour their heart and soul into it, building this business. But then it's like, firstly, what have they taken to get there? How many failures has it taken to get to that point? But then it's also the fact that they are relatively comfortable with it failing as well, because they know that it's all about risk reward. So one of the key things is to identify why the failure occurred and whether it was beyond or within your own control. After you have gathered all the facts, just ask yourself what you think you can learn from the experience and what changes you could make to achieve a different result next time. And do this for every single failure. So then the next one is around how we do need to accept an appropriate level of responsibility. So it's important to accept that, we are responsible for our failures, but also that taking on too much may cause you to unnecessarily blame yourself. On the other hand, blaming other people for everything that went wrong or for the unfortunate circumstances relating to your failure will actually prevent you from learning from it. So when you think about your failure, look for explanations, not excuses. Identify the reasons why you failed and acknowledge what you can do differently next time around. Use it as that learning experience. Share your failures with other people. The easiest way to encourage a team to embrace risk is to share stories of your own failures and what you actually went ahead and learned from with those. Another one is about considering famous failures. So we've mentioned a couple earlier. So Ollie mentioned a couple of examples. And, there are hundreds and thousands of famous people that you will know who have had countless failures before they found success. It's just things like Thomas Edison, Walt Disney, even Colonel Sanders. There's no shortage of famous failures out there. So just spend some time researching just famous people who have failed, and you'll likely find that they did so many times along the way to the ultimate success. It's part of this, like you often see the pedestal in the pyramid where, you've got these supposed overnight billionaires, who have founded a company like Amazon, like Tesla, and you see that success, but what you don't see is the failure that sits underneath it. Most successful people, they adopt failure as basically a strategy for their continued success. Like actors, they get rejected for roles on a regular basis. Athletes get cut from the team. Business owners get turned down for deals all the time. Even our friend Jeanette, the author that we spoke to a couple of episodes ago, she talked to us about her rejections with the publication of her book, but then the bold ambitions that she actually has and how she's using every rejection to move forward. Feelings of failure, they can become a daily occurrence. So the idea here is just to study what they did to bounce back, and you might learn some skills that can actually help you with your own life. It can be helpful to basically see what failure is, that from a lens of what everyone else actually deals with, and comparing that to yourself as well. So next, you may want to ask yourself what you can learn. This has been a common theme throughout this episode, so we just kind of thought we'd kind of bring this to light again. Failure, it can be a great teacher if you are open to learning. So was it a mistake that you made? Did you basically make a whole series of mistakes that led to that one big mistake? Just think about what you could do differently next time. Then you will ensure that your failure has become a life lesson, that it will essentially help you to learn something, so potentially avoiding that thing in future. And this is instead of seeing a failure as a burden, weighing you down. If you think of a promotion like, years later talking about how you regret not getting that promotion. Look at it as a stepping stone towards your goals. So just as I mentioned in my example, that when I reflect back on it, if I'd have left HP in that first instance when getting kind of rejected from it and not kind of pushing on persevering, I wouldn't have met the person that then kind of gave me that leg up into the career that I have today. The idea is to create a plan for moving forward from it. Once you've identified your mistakes and where you can learn from them, then I think you'll be in that position to help to make that plan. Make sure that you're moving forward. Remember that dwelling on your problems or rehashing your mistakes will keep you stuck. So stop thinking, that we mentioned right near the start, that I am a failure, and just focusing on, I am capable of trying again. I feel like I can try again. Next is to then face your fears of failure. So if you've spent most of your life avoiding failure, when you do fail, or the potential for failure could actually be really, really scary when it happens. But for facing your fears, just by doing this, it can be the key to reducing the discomfort. And what we maybe suggest here is to lean into the discomfort. So if you or a member of your team has a new idea, start by taking small steps to lean into the discomfort and uncertainty. So, for example, you could test interest in a product or service before risking enormous amounts of time or money. This allows you to fail quickly at a low cost if the market isn't interested. This was the main reason that I was brought into Salesforce in my first role there. That it was called business experimentation, about how we can encourage businesses to take a lot more risk, but doing it for a lot less of the impact to the business. So rather than spending potentially tens of thousands of dollars on a project, is there something that we can do in PowerPoint, for instance, just to kind of mock up the experience, gain feedback from users of that experience, and then go from there and move forward? The answer is yes, of course you can. If you get resourceful about things, then you can do a lot of things to help reduce the impact of failure and then become more comfortable with it. And we've given the example of experimentation there, but relationships can also be approached in that same way as well. Taking small calculated steps forward, especially if you normally adopt kind of an all-in approach to your relationship, and that the past hasn't been able to identify any kind of red flags or anything. So practice stepping outside your comfort zone with this one. Just do things that might get you rejected, or try a few new things where you could fail. And over time, you'll learn that failure isn't actually as bad as you might imagine. It will help you learn to face your fear of failure in a way that can be productive and help you to reach your goals. And I think this is important, because what we're not suggesting here is that if you have an element of discomfort around failure, what we're not suggesting is you to kind of take all of your money, all of your resources, and kind of just throw it on black or red. We're not saying that at all. The purpose of this one is to kind of ease yourself into it and understand what are the small steps you could do to begin to kind of challenge some of your preconceived ideas around failure. So then finally, and I think this is probably one of the most important ones, and I'll tell a little story on this at the end, is to basically celebrate your failures. If you or your team works hard, pushes beyond your comfort zone and fails anyway, celebrate the failure. Just create a culture where you celebrate risk-taking, even if it doesn't result in success. Even with our children, we encourage them to take risks every day. Things like learning them to ride a bike. They are probably going to fall over, and that's okay. You want them to get up, dust themselves off, and get back on the bike. Things like meeting new friends at school as well. Actually going to school, that's a tough one, because they're massively jumping out of their comfort zone. With school, we encourage them, we celebrate their accomplishments, things like exams, all those kind of things. Now, with this example of celebrating failures, I can't remember where I did come across it, but I think it may have been a Brené Brown session. I can't quite remember. But basically what the principle here was that after the children had got in from school, the whole family would sit around for dinner. And the father would not let the children start eating their dinner until they had spoken about something that they had failed at that day and something that they'd learned. And what he was doing was not being awkward and not encouraging them to fail. What he was doing was encouraging them to try. It was encouraging them to become comfortable with the possibility that they will fail. So just remember, celebration of some of these is key. So we must kind of take what we can from the failure. And, even if we learned something from it, it could be the way that you dealt with it, it's still a success.
I love that last one, especially. I do that with my clients as well. We always talk about, what are the successes that you've had since the last time we met, but also what are the failures that you've had as well, because life is like that. We have ups, we have downs, and we have to actually embrace and celebrate both, because each one of them is a learning opportunity.
Agree.
So that brings us to the end of our discussion about failure, one I've really enjoyed discussing this evening. It's really taken me down memory lane, actually, quite a bit as well, to reflect back some of the failures that I've had in my life. And as I said earlier on, there's not one failure that I've had in my life that I've not learned something about myself or the experience or the situation, and that I've gone on to for listening to this, and ask that you like and share. It really does help us out. Hit the subscribe button and activate notifications so that you don't miss the weekly videos, which we normally post on a Friday. So hopefully we've given you some great content to start your weekend off. So see you next time. Take care of yourselves and carry on failing.